Okay, so I've got captions on as well for folk in case people who are watching afterwards need them. So move them out of the way. Okay, let's go. So welcome everyone. I'm totally excited. This has been in planning now since before Christmas. So I'm really excited that we're here. You're here as well. We have invitees who have also come into the room, which is great. And so here we officially launch our Northern Digital Storytelling Festival 2023. So this is going to be going on for the next 2 weeks. We have 58 speaker sessions booked. Over the course of the next 2 weeks. We've got everything from theatre to AI, we've got VR, AR, we've got all sorts. And what we're trying to do is bring people together who maybe normally wouldn't get together to have conversations in this space, to learn a bit about digital storytelling, learn about the examples of what people are doing in this space, to inspire us all, maybe to meet new people, and learn about what's going on in the world, and hopefully we'll all benefit in some way from that, which would be great. I'd like to thank our sponsors, who are the Screen Industries Growth Network. Thanks to them for funding this, which allows us all to come together, and it allows you guys to get paid a little bit, which is always nice, although it's not very much, I'm sorry, but hopefully it helps with the beer money. And basically, we're going to record these sessions as well, so if people can't make it today, I know there's a few folk have come through saying that they're busy now, we're going to record the sessions. We will put them up on a YouTube channel after this, and I'll share the links with anyone who's booked on and anyone else who's interested. So everyone hopefully can enjoy this now and later. Okay, so what I'm going to do, just remind everyone of the format. So we have 3 speakers today. We have Lucy and Tim and Kev. I'm going to introduce you individually before your presentations. So we have 3 short presentations of 15 minutes each, talking about the subjects around what is digital storytelling for this session. And then we're going to have about a half-hour panel discussion. So ask a few questions, we'll have a bit of a chat. It's all very relaxed. Imagine you're just sitting in your living room, or maybe you are. And we'll have a bit of a chat, and then at the end, if we've got some questions from our audience, then we can maybe ask them as well. And that'll be us. Then we can go and have a nice cup of tea. Okay, so let's get started then. So I'm going to just find my introductions. So we're going to start with Lucy from Pilot Theatre. So Lucy Hammond is, she works for Pilot Theatre, is a creative producer, and works with immersive technology and virtual reality specifically. Her projects Monoliths, Traitor and The Archive have all toured internationally and have been shown at several prestigious festivals, including the Tribeca Film Festival, Melbourne International Film Festival, BFI London Film Festival, where she was nominated for Best Immersive Artwork 2022, and also Sheffield Doc Fest. And if I'm not wrong, I think I saw on LinkedIn this week you were shortlisted for yet more awards, which is fantastic. So congratulations on that. It sounds like you're going great guns at the moment.
Thank you so much, Heather. Oh my gosh, what an introduction. It's always a little bit flustering to hear those things when someone says them out loud. Okay, brilliant. So I'm going to actually just share my slides. So this was a huge, can everyone see this? Is that okay? Okay. So this, for me, was a huge question, and it's really sort of interesting to be going first on this, because I know about the amazing, diverse and varied work that Tim and Kev have done. So I think we should get a really good sort of coverage around this topic that kind of illustrates the fact that digital storytelling is actually very, very hard to put your finger on as a definition. It is so varied, and there are so many different styles of projects and ways of experiencing digital storytelling. So I felt like for this session, I wanted to sort of go through some of the questions and the frameworks that I have explored through my work at Pilot Theatre. So as Heather said, I work for Pilot Theatre. I'm projects producer here, and I'm creative producer and director for our work looking at using immersive technologies and technology. And we are primarily a theatre company, but this channel of our work has been really intriguing. And I hope through the session, when I'm talking through the slides, I want to sort of discuss how we've gone from live experiences, been inspired by those, and then brought technology as part of the integral part of the storytelling. So to start us off, I want to start with the first project, which is monoliths. So this is not actually the first project that we undertook as a company, but it is our most recent one. So I wanted to sort of use it as people might be able to see it when it's on tour later this year. So I felt like it would be a good launching off point. And I think it's also a really great example of how when I've been thinking about incorporating digital storytelling into our work, how we've been inspired by live experiences and how that's kind of become embedded in the sort of interactive and immersive work that we create. So on the left there, you can see a production shot from a project called Northern Girls that Pilot Theatre produced. During the pandemic years, there were several iterations of this project. And it had two sides to it. One was commissioning Northern female writers who were already established to create monologues and poetry about their Northern identity, and not just their own personal stories, but just stories that celebrated those voices. And those performances were performed live in outdoor spaces for small audiences, socially distanced. And alongside that, we commissioned people who had never written anything before, and we took them on a process through a series of workshops to kind of get them to that point, and they were performed alongside the professional writers' work. So what was really inspiring about this whole project was that it felt like something that could not exist without those circumstances which forced us to kind of be outside with these beautiful sort of fire pits everywhere. And the soundscape of the towns and places where we were, so for instance, we were in York, we were in Scarborough and Bridlington, those sort of backdrops became integral to the experience of those performances. And it felt like that's something that is quite hard to sort of capture apart from in live atmosphere. And this sort of started a way of thinking, and I was thinking, how can we translate this to interactive and immersive storytelling? It felt like a really great jumping off point. And then monoliths came about. So for me, I was thinking, we were already immersed in a live experience, and I wanted to sort of distill that feeling of being in the soundscape of the landscape and be able to bottle it and make it sort of portable and be able to be experienced by a whole range of people over a really long period of time. These performances sort of lived and died on the night that they happened, and these amazing works sort of existed in that sort of live moment, which is always really exciting, but I thought there's something so special about this, we need to be able to distill it. And so for Monoliths, we commissioned 3 writers with new pieces of work who had worked on the Northern Girls project to write, in this case, specifically about a landscape that meant a lot to them in the north of England. And so in doing that, we wanted to create a virtual reality experience that incorporated real soundscapes that were recorded on location in the moors, in Bradford, and on the northeast coast, with the voices of these writers, of these women. And so we had 3 new poems and then created magic realist environments to situate the audience in. So Monoliths, I wanted to sort of illustrate how from something live, we created and bottled this sort of kind of atmosphere into, or I hope we've done this, into a virtual reality experience. And by putting the headset on, the nature of that type of storytelling means that just as you were in the landscape when the live performances were happening, you are fully situated in the landscape in the VR experience. And I believe without the VR technology, you couldn't recreate this. And I think that that's a really special question. So, we'll go on to that question in a moment. That's one of the first things I'd say. Without that VR technology, I don't think Monoliths could exist in the same way. And it wouldn't be as easily tourable. And it's been so far seen by about 5,000 people, whereas the original show was seen by about 250 people. So it's actually really kind of expanded the reach of those voices. The second example is another live to digital experience in a way. And this is Traitors. This is the first project I ever undertook. It began life as a play where you broke into a building, in this case a school, after dark as an audience, and followed the life of a young hacker who had uncovered some files that had some very sort of sensitive information that you had to decide at the end whether they should be for the public domain or given back to the government. So this experience was translated by myself and a really brilliant team of collaborators into a VR escape room experience that sort of melded a lot of different aspects of storytelling. So we'd gone from quite a sort of expansive, sprawling sort of promenade kind of performance, and I wanted to distill this using virtual reality in a way, again, where I felt like the VR was integral to that storytelling. And this is a theme that I think will keep coming up. I feel like the technology has to really be knitted in. Without it, would it exist in the same way? So for Traitor, the audience plays in a team of two. One person wears a VR headset and the other person is in the room. And the person in the room has the controls for the VR and the person in the VR has the visuals. So you have to communicate together to make it work. So very unlike monoliths, the VR in this case is not hyper immersive. It's actually sort of used to create a space within a space. So we'd taken the theatrical experience, which was spread over 15 separate rooms, and brought it into one room by using the VR mechanism. And so that felt very exciting in terms of digital storytelling, because we were again sort of distilling something down into a really kind of high octane, very sort of hyper personal experience actually. And there was also a live actor who you can see, my colleague Luke James. That's actually in a school where we performed it. This premiered at Tribeca in New York, and then we were performing it in schools in the north of England as well. So it was a really great sort of range. I felt like this is a great example again of how, in a different way, technology and digital storytelling can cross over across both live and in headset experiences in the case of VR, for instance. So that's just another way of thinking. So this is a still from the film work that was part of that project. So films sort of appear on screens as part of the piece. And that is Emma, that is Pepta Nsuki, who played Emma, who is the hacker that's uncovered the files. And the decision at the end was the same. You had to decide whether to release the files to the public or give them back to the government. And that's a whole nother presentation at some point, which I'm sure will be really exciting to hear about what the members of the public did in those situations. So this is my first notes, my sort of field notes from these projects. The first question is, and I think when you're looking to begin doing these experiences, or you have an inkling that a story might feel right to be told in using technology, you have to ask the question, could this experience exist without it? And if it could exist without it, what would it look like? And I ask this question a lot when developing these projects, because if it can exist without it, we're a theatre company, why not make it without it? And actually, for both of those, without those mechanisms, without, this little diagram here actually is showing what the Traitor VR was doing. The red blob is someone with the VR headset. They have a room that they're looking at, and the person in the room is there and they have to communicate. So we're creating a room within a room. I don't know another way of doing that without a VR headset. And I feel like without that technology, that could not have existed. So that became a really important aspect for me. So I'm just going to quickly, I know I'm running probably out of time, talk about another project that we created called The Archive, which was a screen-based interactive game for teenagers. And it's based on the idea that there is a secret organization of archivists who gather all of the paper ephemera of your life. So it could be a napkin that you've written on from a cafe where you broke up with your first boyfriend. It could be a childhood drawing, a doodle in the back of a notebook in your classroom. And this organization has gathered it all, and they've had to digitize due to budget cuts. And so they've created this digital world which takes over your desktop, and you yourself become an archivist. And by exploring the archives, you piece together the lives of two teenagers and their personal stories by looking and sifting through the paper ephemera of their life. So this is a still actually, it actually does look like this, the game. This is just one of the final artwork from the art director on it. And so it takes over your desk. You can see in the corner, this little coffee cup gives you sort of mindfulness advice while you're exploring, so that you can have a moment of calm if you feel a little bit overwhelmed. And this was a real adventure. And again, this project, interestingly, the technology in terms of the storytelling really helped with this idea of the audience's role and their agency in this piece. The technology allowed there to be a kind of facilitation, that if this was happening in person, you were physically sifting through the archives, you might not be able to, you might have to have a person there to guide them, or you'd have an external person interfering in that experience. Whereas by making this a screen-based game, a young person can play it on their computer at school, or they could play it at home, and they are enabled to really be contemplative in that experience by sort of engaging with it as fast or as slowly as they want, by picking it up and putting it down again, by replaying it and finding different aspects that they might have seen before. And I feel like if we had gone down the route of having a real life archive, which might have been possible, that sort of aspect of interference in terms of facilitation might have really rendered a very different kind of experience. And I was quite excited by the idea of this sort of storytelling. And so again, the question is, could this exist without? And in this case, it probably could, but the experience would be incredibly different for an audience member. So these are my other questions. Talking about distribution, the game actually in that format is really easy to distribute, because you can just send a link for people to download it and they can play it on their own computers. And I also like the idea of, for young people especially, digital storytelling having an aura of magic that is outside of using an iPhone or types of technology that are incredibly ubiquitous in young people's lives. So I think this is another really interesting aspect of digital storytelling I'm sure the other two panelists will cover as well, which is things can still be digital storytelling if you can't see the technology that is powering that story. And I think that that is another really important thing to say. Of course, in these projects I've mentioned, in two of them you have a VR headset, and on one of them you play on the computer. But there are so many and varied stories where the technology is invisible, but it creates a sense of magic that is unparalleled, that you can't create in other aspects, especially with direct engagement. Another big question that this game created for me in terms of digital storytelling is, can an audience fail or win at some of these experiences? And I think sometimes when you're looking at a more passive experience where someone is sitting and enjoying something like monoliths, for instance, this is not a big question, but quite often in digital storytelling, the audience is at the center of the story. And what does it feel like for that audience member if they can fail at getting through that story? And how do you accommodate for that? Do you want them to fail or win? Or the careful structures around that need to be really carefully thought out. And also, how much freedom is too much freedom? How much do you want to build parameters for an audience to ensure that they feel safe in the experience, that they are pushing boundaries themselves, but they can't just get completely untethered and lost from the storytelling experience? I think that letting go of control sometimes for some of these things, especially in VR, where the audience can look wherever they want for the whole experience, is actually really thrilling and exciting, and something that I think digital storytelling is really exciting to explore as well. So this is a still from Monoliths, just this is on the top deck of a bus. Things appear on the windows of the bus. You have no control over what direction the bus is going. You just sit back and enjoy the ride. But I just wanted to show you an illustration of what that looked like, and the kind of magic realist element of things appearing on the windows, etc. This was actually developed by an incredible programming team led by Andy Campbell at One-to-One Development Trust. So I just wanted to shout them out. They're amazing. So my final thing, how do we sell it? This is my final question. How do we sell these experiences to audiences? And what is the ask from the audience? And I think that this is something that is quite often not explored when you're coming from the creative angle. Is, okay, you've created your digital storytelling project. The audience is at the center of it. How do you then sell it to an audience so they understand what to expect when they arrive and what will be asked of them? And this was a huge challenge for Traitor, because the audience were asked to speak. Were asked to speak to each other, sometimes another stranger, to work together. How do you market that? And how do you either get those people that really engaged in that to kind of book to see those experiences? But also, you don't want someone to come in and be completely horrified by the fact that they're going to have to fully engage with it. So I think that that's a really, I don't have all the answers to this, and I'm sure across the conference people will, but that's a real challenge. So this was just a really shonky diagram that I put together, where the audience, you are the audience in the middle, and this is probably more for VR actually, but you're in the middle and there's an adventure to be had. But these red dotted lines are my very careful parameters as director and producer that I've created in order to make the adventure feel fun and safe for you to explore. So that's me finished. these are my contact details. I'm always up for talking about projects and you know, having conversations. So please do get in touch at any point if you'd like to discuss your work. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lucy. That was amazing. And that last image of the spaghetti is just basically my life, I think, minus the red dots around the edges. And I've taken a note of that last question as well, because I will actually put it to the panelists throughout the festival, because I think it's a really interesting question, actually. So thank you for that. And that was a really excellent presentation. So thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to go on now to Tim's presentation next, and then we'll ask some questions at the end, if that's okay. Thank you. Okay, so Tim, I'm going to introduce you next. So Tim Powell is a freelance producer and creative consultant. As a producer, he creates award-winning experiences that combine immersive technology, live performance, and physical installations that delight audiences in venues, public spaces, at festivals, and online. In his consultant role, he helps organisations develop strategies for innovation and approaches to immersive storytelling, and he presents and teaches his work internationally. Currently, Tim's a creative entrepreneur in residence at Reading University, and before that was a consulting producer at the Gunpowder Plot, which is a feature-length immersive historical experience at the Tower of London, and it received rave reviews from the British media. So developed in partnership between Layered Reality, sorry, my dog just moved my laptop, don't mind the earthquake, and Historical Royal Palaces, the Gunpowder Plot transports audiences deep into 1605 London as active participants in Britain's most famous plot. So for this presentation, Tim's going to talk about immersive storytelling involving two simultaneous stories, one by the creator and one experienced by the audience as they journey through the story world. So I'm going to hand over to you, Tim, to tell us that tale. Thank you very much.
Great, and you can hear me now, I hope.
We can, yeah.
Oh, excellent. And for a Northern Digital Storytelling Festival, I have to put my hands up. I am in Bristol, but I do quite genuinely have a whippet asleep behind me. So I feel,
and also, you're in the Northern Hemisphere. That's good enough for me. We've got people from all over the world presenting to the festival, so don't worry.
So yeah, really pleased to be here. And I have put a few slides together about me, but the introduction was very thorough. It's much easier to write those things and hear them backed. I agree with you, Lucy, there. So, but that's great. So I'm just rearranging things on my screen. So I'm going to focus on immersive storytelling, which I guess is possibly a subset of digital storytelling, but one for me that has a kind of the greatest difference from what we call kind of immersive story, what we call traditional storytelling. And just say that this isn't meant as a kind of competition or anything. There's absolutely the kind of the need for traditional storytelling. You know, I'm the biggest fan of a great book or a great film or a great play or whatever, but I think there's particular differences with immersive formats that kind of really benefit from unpicking. So what are we talking about when the difference between traditional and immersive? And firstly, some definitions, because absolutely everything is called immersive now, even things that quite definitely are not. So for this, I'm going to define immersive experiences as those that kind of completely surround a person and allow them to kind of feel that they're part of a completely different world, a completely kind of created world around them. And often that's delivered through technologies, but not always. And these are the type of technologies, they call it spatial computing. So it's not about a 2D screen anymore. It's about actually locating digital content in physical space. It's about the embodied internet. It's about being able to have human actions and human decisions that trigger content rather than buttons on screens. And it's about the interplay between real and virtual worlds and the kind of blurring of those boundaries. And again, a definition there that immersive technologies are those that extend or replace reality for the user, and that's the digital Caswell definition. So, as you said in the introduction, my latest kind of big production has been the Gunpowder Plot immersive experience. I'll talk about that particular show in some detail this evening at 6 o'clock. But I'm just going to talk more about some of the general principles now that we try to put into place with that show. And I think immersive storytelling is really all comes back to senses, really, because they're multi-sensory experiences in a way that traditional stories are not always. So our senses work by a stimulus coming from the outside world, creating a sensation in our bodies, in our sense organs, that we turn into a perception. And the kind of freaky thing about it is that we don't have access to the world directly. We get these sensations in and we build a model of it in our head. The world is just a kind of swirling mass of electromagnetic forces and all the rest of it. This kind of nice, neat world of houses and cars and roads and all the rest of it is in our brains only. And what that means is that when we get those perceptions into our brains, they are unique to us personally, because they mix with all of the experiences we've had before. We compare them to all of those memories that have been stored and emotions that are connected to them. And in terms of evolution, we've evolved to notice change, not continuity. Otherwise, we've been sensory overload all of the time. So we just notice when things are changing. You know, it's basically Neanderthal brains looking out for the saber-toothed tiger. And in a traditional story, they are fundamentally about change. Something happens to the world that kind of changes the world for a character. The character goes on a kind of quest to reassert order over the world. They meet characters who will help them and hinder them. They have challenges that they overcome. And ordinarily, they have, you know, they are not able to change the world, but they are changed themselves. And then the ending is them kind of getting used to this new world. And the model, the kind of classic model of this is The Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell, which is looking at kind of myth and those kind of archetypal stories, which is absolutely what all the Star Wars shows were based on. And once you learn that, you'll see it absolutely everywhere. But we are going on, in these traditional stories, we're going on a journey into other people's minds. To who are they really? We're trying to work it out with our minds, who they are. And good writers create information gaps that we need to fill. So they kind of, you know, we're not, why did those two things happen? And what are they thinking? It's a very cerebral action about understanding other people. And just, you know, it's important to say that, like, storytelling is not something that humans choose to do or happen to do. It's absolutely kind of fundamental to who we are as people. We make sense of the complexity of world by turning it into these cause and effect stories. And because we are, you know, all humans, we are the heroes of our own stories. We kind of reorder, recalibrate everything that happens to put us as the kind of hero in the center of it all. And in terms of these traditional stories, then it's important to know that the audience understands that their role is passive. You know, they know where the stage is, they know where the screen is, they know where the frame is, and they know that they're outside of that, and they just need to give their attention to it. So this shift then to immersive storytelling is often called story doing. And fundamentally, it's because it's so multi-sensory, we're put into these situations where, you know, if it's a VR headset, we're given a completely different visual world. Often haptics give us different sense of touch. There's spatial sound, there's smells, all of these things. Our brains receive that data in exactly the same way as they do data about the real world. And we turn it into a model into our brains in exactly the same way as we experience the real world. So rather than creating information gaps that our brains solve, immersive storytelling creates these action gaps that we have to do something or choose something or move somewhere in order to kind of shift that narrative on and kind of push the story forward. So this is often been described as story doing. So the shift is from storytelling to story doing. And another way I think is to describe it is storytelling through the body rather than just the brain. So our brains are telling us that we are really there. So it's a shift from it being a cerebral process to a much more visceral one. And you know, as you said, so that Heather, I like to think of it as telling two stories simultaneously. And I think, Lucy, a lot of your language is exactly describing this as well. There's one story created by the creator. That's the one that we normally think of as stories, a set of characters and things happen to them in places. And, but then there's the experience that we have as the audience member as we journey through that experience. And the challenge for immersive storytelling is the need to tell those two like seamlessly and simultaneously within, and they need to kind of coexist within that story world. And because our brains model it as they do reality, it becomes something that happens to us, and it gets kind of coded by our brains as a memory. So when people come out of immersive shows, they don't describe what happened to the characters. They say it happened to me. I did this. I took the gunpowder over the river. I did this, which I think, you know, as engrossed as you can be in a traditional story, that's not the language you'd use to describe it. So I think that's the kind of, that was the first indication to me that there's something quite fundamentally different, really. And because it's, there's something called the peak end rule, which is about how people remember experiences that happen to them personally, and actually, rather than remembering the whole narrative line of it, they tend to just remember the most intense moment of it and the final moment of it. So they'll be able to tell you all about the story of the characters, but in terms of their story through it, they'll tell you about the most exciting thing and the final thing that happened, which is, I think, a really good principle when you're telling these stories. So that is my argument. You may agree or disagree about how a traditional and immersive are different. So how do we go about creating that second journey, the journey that is the audience's experience through there? So I've kind of mapped together a set of ingredients, which are the type of immersion that you're creating, the aesthetics of the world, the nature of their presence in the world, who are they, and the degree of agency that they have. And I think they're all quite overlapping and interchangeable, really, but they're useful ways of thinking about that audience role. So in terms of immersion, there are really kind of distinct types, I think. So the first is spatial or atmospheric immersion. I mean, my picture there is Punch Drunk, who I think absolutely exemplify this. So it's creating a really believable world that you feel as a person in that world that you want to explore it, you want to find out more about it. And that's the kind of, there's no specific linear narrative in there, but you just want to explore it because it's completely believable and exciting and sexy and all of those sorts of things. Then there are sort of mental immersions. So there's a tactical type, which is much more short kind of skills based. This is zombie fighting, this is Beat Saber, this is all of those things. You're reacting very kind of responsibly to stuff. And then there's a strategic mental immersion, which is a much more longer challenge. So kind of, you know, this is Minecraft, obviously, or Roblox, or any of those things where people go into these worlds and build these sort of ecosystems and lives and farms and all the rest of it. And then the kind of mental narrative immersion, which is the traditional storytelling that I've spoken about. And I think there's another type of immersion as well. So many immersive experiences are not massively linked to story, but they create this completely overwhelming sensory world. This was something called the Dream Machine, which was one of the Unboxed projects. And you lay on these seats with a blanket on, and they just flashed white lights at you. You had your eyes closed, and it created these incredible hallucinations, basically, these swirling worlds of colors and fractals and planets and all the rest of it. If you opened your eyes, it was just flashing lights, but you were totally in that world. But so I think that was an example of where there wasn't a traditional story actually, but there was absolutely audience story, an audience experience in there that was created by this technology. And you know, these types of immersion absolutely can be combined. So in fact, it's a good way to do it is to combine spatial and a type of mental immersion. They create the most compelling and rich experiences. There's a really good piece of research called the Immersive Formats report. I can't remember the exact wording, done by Catherine Allen at Limina Immersive, about all of these, how these different types of kind of immersion combine to create different types of experience. then the aesthetics of the world. Have you captured the real world? Is it photorealistic, or is it much more representative, a kind of a stylized dreamlike world? Because, you know, as good as technology is, we're still in danger of entering the uncanny valley, which is this gulf. As things become more human-like, the closer they get, the more freaked out basically we are about them. And so, you know, R2-D2 and C3PO are very cute humanoid type things, but the kind of the latest kind of latex robots are kind of terrifying because they're too close, but yet we know they're not human. And then the audience presence and embodiment, you know, we feel we are in that story world. That's the core of immersive storytelling. So is it me that's there, or am I a different character? And am I a ghost when I'm there? Am I able to kind of just spy on people without being noticed back, or am I observed? Am I expected to interact with the digital characters there? And often we enter these worlds with a group of people in the real world, and are they there in the digital world as well, or was it just me? So there's lots of things to think about. You can't just put someone somewhere. There's a lot of questions that they have in their head after that point as well. And as Lucy said, audience agency, you know, it's a tremendously exciting experience when you can genuinely move a story on by doing something, moving your body, making a choice. But you have to make sure that you don't overpromise that, because as soon as you butt up against the edge of that, you break that immersion completely. If you promise more agency than you can actually deliver, then it will be a kind of frustrating experience for audiences. And then the final one is modes of experience. So this is about really audience expectations. Is it a narrative experience? Is it a gamified one, which has a clear game mechanic where you can win or lose and kind of gain points and levels and all that stuff? Or is it much more about creating those sort of moments, those kind of intense kind of moments that are shareable? And I think what's the important thing really is that you're consistent in that. People understand what a game is, so you have to kind of treat it like a game in the virtual immersive world as you would in the real world. And this is probably the slightly the idea of emergent storytelling or generative narratives, which are those that the audience choices create this create the narrative. So it's very much that second story that I was talking about. And there's lots of argument that whereas in an authored narrative, which is just that traditional model, what's revealed is the story world itself and the characters in it. But as you move more towards this generative or narrative, you're actually revealing more about the audience themselves, because they're finding out about how their choices impact on that kind of on that story world, or they're often put into scenarios which they would never encounter in the real world. And they learn how they would kind of, or they find out how they would react in those, maybe, which is something we might not want to do, I guess, but would be interesting nonetheless. So this is all of this can be tied together really as the audience role. And if there's one thing I've learned, is that it must be consistent and rewarding. You have to have these rules that carry across the whole experience for people, because you can't expect it to be a game in one scene and a narrative in the next. And you know, that it needs to be consistent. Their character and the rules of the world need to carry all the way through. So that's, yeah, these are a whole kind of bundle of ingredients, as I said, that overlap. They often refer to the same things. They describe that second story, the story of the audience's journey through the experience. And then finally, just 2 slides about how you can best to create that first story, that kind of more traditional story, in order to help design these 2 stories together. So, you know, the first is the concept of world building, which is really familiar with sci-fi and fantasy, etc., where you don't just create a single narrative through a world. You create its whole geography and history and political affiliations and weather systems and animals and all of the things. And what that allows you to do is to create multiple stories within that. So, and if you've kind of created a whole world already, then the number of journeys that the audience can make through that world is, you know, is hugely kind of multiplied. And it also allows you to do what's kind of called transmedia storytelling, mostly, which is stories that kind of jump from digital to the real world, or they happen across different platforms. But they're all kind of anchored and rooted within that story world itself. So, and if you don't know the example of Why So Serious, which is a Batman transmedia kind of marketing campaign, which had mobile phones hidden in cakes in bakeries and this whole massive journey that people went on. Absolutely incredible stuff. So to conclude then, we experience immersive content in the same way as our brains model reality, the real world. And your brain is telling you that you are in that story world. And your presence there makes you a protagonist. You need to understand your role and your agency within it, and it needs to be consistent and rewarding. And there are two stories, the one you're told and the one you create. People bring their own experiences to this, so they make their own meanings from the story they create. And arguably, they learn as much about themselves as they do about the story world whilst doing it. So thank you very much.
That was fantastic. Thank you, Tim. I'll have to watch that re-recording again as well afterwards. There's a lot of information in there, which is really useful. So thank you very much for that. Okay, so I'm going to go on now to Kev. Now I'm going to just try and change my share screen here, Kev. So you need to try, while I'm introducing, try and see if your screen share works okay. And if not, we'll have a small panic. Okay, so I'm going to introduce Kev. So Kev is from Inspired Youth. Kev's an award-winning filmmaker and campaigner. He's had 15 years of experience in projects that ignite positive debate around social issues. After earning a first-class degree in film and media at Plymouth University, he won a Royal Television Society Award for his first film, Inner Sense, about domestic violence, and he's continued to raise awareness of his work since. His passion is to collaborate with people at the heart of the experience. And I've known Kev for nearly 15 years now, and I've seen some real powerful impact of the work that Inspired Youth have done across Yorkshire and the UK. So I'm really excited to hear from Kev. So Kev, over to you.
Yeah, well, first of all, Tim and Lucy, I mean, the presentations were very slick, very visually exciting as well, and very mentally stimulating. It's given me loads of ideas. I'm trying to concentrate on my presentation coming up and getting all anxious, and then my head's going off thinking about projects that I could integrate some of this technology. So yeah, it's been good and inspiring already. I mean, I guess in a way, the emphasis of my work is slightly more on the person and on communities and social issues than it is about the sort of social, about the technology. But in a way, I'm using technology as a tool and a vehicle to tell digital stories, but by allowing people that have got real lived experience about a subject to be parts of creating those narratives. Let's see if this works. Okay. So Inspired Youth is a not-for-profit social enterprise established in 2007. And we do social media campaigns, really looking at issues across the board, from dementia, things about homelessness, children in care. We've done a massive range of different social issues, and the idea is to collaborate both with third sector organisations that are supporting people, and also the people that they support, the real people that are behind the stories that we create. So for example, we've done projects collaborating with other artists. So I like to collaborate a lot with professional artists, be that traditional artists or people that do spray painting and graph and that kind of thing, right through to theatre and film. And often our projects culminate in a screening or an exhibition that we bring key stakeholders and the community together, where it's a sort of reward for the people that would never imagine to have their faces on a cinema screen, in Everyman Cinema, and be sat there, as part of a debate about the issue that they're bringing to the table, whatever that is. So yeah, it's arts, media, film, storytelling, but it is about social inclusion. It's about including people's voices. It's about learning about a topic through the experiences that people have had, and how you can then, shape that into a narrative or create a piece of storytelling that engages people, touches people, challenges people, inspires people. But often it's about reducing stigma or tackling prejudice and these kinds of things. So it's about championing voices in a way. And we do lots of different types of products. So, the film could be a documentary, or it could involve acting, but a lot of the time it's the people from the project that are actually acting or performing in the actual piece. So they're not like real actors or whatever. They're just real people that have gone through a journey. And I like the journey, because I feel like you build relationships as you go on a journey. So usually it's multiple workshops doing different art forms and exploring the topic, just allowing people to explore and share their experiences. And sometimes we do that through characters. So it's not a person directly opening up about their own life. And sometimes it is documentary about someone's real lived experience. And so at the moment we're working with young people. It's about systems change, but we work with adults as well. So for example, this is Change, Grow, Live. It's a national charity. They work with volunteers. This is like one of the initial concept sort of mood board things, which was designed by the people in the volunteers that are engaged with that charity, who've been basically on a recovery journey through addiction, and now they're volunteering and going on to bigger and better things. So it's a real life volunteer recruitment campaign effectively, but it's driven by lived experience. So those people come in, they talk about their lives, where they've come from, what challenges they had, and then how this organization has helped transform their life. And then we try to then communicate that back out into the real world. But the power is in that engagement, in those people feeling part of something and validating their stories and showing how powerful stories really can be to inspire others. And building relationships, building, safe spaces for people to feel like you're genuine, you're authentic, you're trying to, present them in a positive, constructive way, and genuinely including them. So not sort of lip service. Actually, it is actually co-production. I might direct because that's my skill, but then I want them to influence that. I want them to influence what that looks like, how that could be, what their ideas and things like that. So thought I'd just show you an example. This one's made in Colburn, which is a very deprived area. And at the time, there was a bit of an issue with antisocial behaviour. And the local council were using things like these, the dispersing noises and stuff like that. And what I was brought in to do was to sort of create a film that could start a conversation between the young people and the local community, to involve them in looking at what the problem is and what could be done to resolve it. So we ran a series of workshops, and over time these young people built up confidence and created their own narrative, and we shot the film together. So I'm just going to show you that film now, and hopefully the audio works.
We are young, but are we really free?
You hear that?
We are moody, sometimes hard to reach. We are driven, kind and caring. We're not all vandals and troublemakers. We don't dream of a life and benefits. We want to learn, and we do actually care about others. We support each other. We've been through things you haven't seen, felt things you haven't felt. We've been through some hard experiences. through adoption, family problems, through bereavement, ADHD, anxiety, depression, the pain of loss. We're not all ruthless all the time. Everyone is different. And not all young people are the same. We care about our families. Life has been tough on us. Some of us just wish we could have our mums back. We believe in second chances. We all have dreams for our futures. To get parafit, to become Marines, to work with animals, to go to college, to do apprenticeships, to make it to university. Some of us struggle with education. Some of us suffer through mental health. The medication makes you feel sick and it's hard to focus. We believe young people need more attention, more compassion and more understanding from the community. Young people feel sad, angry, frustrated, forgotten. Young people dream of not being a failure. We grow up far too quick because of life experiences, the things our eyes have seen. We are not supposed to see so young. Young people would achieve more if they're noticed for the right reasons. Society should help families get out of poverty. The world needs to know what's going on in young people's lives. We are seen as cheeky and intimidating. We are really just shy, scared and hurt by life. We believe respect works both ways. If we aren't ready for the real world, it's going to hit us like a train. There needs to be more support for people who struggle with mental health. It affects you, your friends and your family. Too many young people are growing up in poverty. Everyone should have a fair chance. We have ambitions and aspirations, just like everyone else, and we have hopes and dreams. We want to swim with dolphins, own a dream car and a big house, and have a family and a dog, and fly planes and all kinds of dreams. We just want to be understood and respected in this world. We just want the support to create a positive life and a brighter, happy future. And if we could change the world, it would be how we look after the environment and how people treated each other.
Still playing. Okay, so as you saw there was like nearly 2,500 veterans in that area. It's a massive army base, obviously, but with that there does come a bit of poverty and deprivation, and so it was amazing to work with them young people. We had a screening at their local cinema, and the local councillors came, the VIPs, and then there was a debate afterwards, and some of the young people got invited to the council to talk about the antisocial sort of issues in the area. So in a way it brought it back to what was really going on. But I think more than anything it's about trying to change the perception, because I always think the media always demonizes young people, and young people are often seen as sort of negative stereotypes. So it was about saying, past that child's like maybe behavior that's seen as antisocial and you're trying to just disperse them, how about trying to engage them? And like it inspired me, because I felt like when you heard these children's stories, you know, which were heartbreaking, some of them, you think, well, they're probably just a bit of a damaged child, and like having that sort of experience and trauma in their life, maybe they don't find it easy to get on in mainstream education, or you know, maybe they do have problems with the behavior, but it's about how do you engage them, how do you give them ownership about that story and how their story is told. And then when you give them the opportunity, they start saying things like that, and you're like, wow, you know, I want to swim with dolphins, and I want to have a house and have a family, and all the normal things that all of us dream of. And it brings us away from the stereotype, and it gets us to look at the human. Just another example, this one was called Human. It was about Gypsy Roma traveller children about the stigma and the racism that they often face, about their issues with education, about their ideas about how you could utilize their culture and help them to get further in life by taking away that stigma, because they feel like basically racism against travelers is the last acceptable form of racism, and it, you know, and it is their life. You know, they've experienced that growing up. They're always cautious and self-conscious about it. So we created this poster campaign that they devised, and they collaborated with a designer, and then they had the screening at the cinema, and we had a question and answer. And again, VIPs, people with like stakeholders, people with influence, people from the council, getting people, communities talking. So the power of stories to not to have all of the answers, but to instigate the start, like the conversation, the debate, and what is possible, and being inspired by the humanness of people behind those stereotypes and labels and titles that people are given. I don't know how many minutes I'm in, Heather, but I don't think I've got time to show all the clips, but are we good? Yeah.
How many minutes is it?
Hey?
How many minutes is the video?
Oh, that video, that one is 6 minutes.
So
I'll show you 30 seconds or so.
okay, go on.
This film is about stereotypes.
This is a film about us, about travellers.
About how we're treated and discriminated against.
Judged and written off. We are proud to be travellers.
Proud of what makes us unique.
Okay. Yeah, so I've just got a few other examples. This one's called The 1%. It was with Care Leavers. They devised their own series of films. It's part of the York Media Festival. Again, we had a cinema screening, and it was really powerful. It was about their lives coming through the care system, about they're not just a number, they've got potential and future, and they've got dreams and aspirations, and all of the same sort of themes. I sometimes work with groups, and this is a campaign of people that are campaigning against poverty. They're called Poverty to Solutions, and we made a film together about why people are going through these kind of experiences and these kind of stories around the table of political change, so that policy can be influenced by those lived experiences. And then some of my work is with young people. As I said before, at the moment we're doing a systems change project where young people lead the journey and decide what's important to them, and that's going to culminate in a showcase in a theatre with some dignitaries and guests and audience. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm also helping Selby AVS at the moment, doing their rebranding, their organisation, and I went out to see all the different aspects of their organisation. This is part of their social isolation project, where they have volunteers going out into the community. So I was getting little bits of documentary insight into the different people they work with in the community. It was absolutely mint. Doreen was absolutely mint. Honestly, like I just loved meeting Doreen. She had all these stories, and yeah, it was amazing. And just, you know, you got the sense that these people have just got stories inside of them, and they're disconnected from the world. And that's because Doreen's lost her husband and she's on her own in a community and isn't connected. But it can be for lots of other reasons. It can be because of social isolation, or it could be because of domestic violence, or it could be to do with family problems. So my work's also about connecting people and making them feel like their story matters too and their voice matters too. Another big piece of work that I've recently done was working with York Ending Stigma. We made a suicide prevention film. It sounds really depressing, but it's actually really inspiring and moving and human. So they did some screenings of that, and they've done a research project, a paper around it. So I was really proud to be part of that. I lost a brother to suicide when I was a child, and that pretty much inspired my journey into what I do with Inspired Youth Arts today. So I was absolutely proud to be part of that. And yeah, they did that campaign, and it's important. The work that I do, I believe in, I'm passionate about it, and hopefully I've inspired you too.
Thank you, Kev. It's amazing. So just to, you know, how many lives you touch actually with the work you do, and how you put these people who, you know, feel powerless and and have no voice a lot of the time, you put them in the driving seat and allow them to tell their stories using these digital tools. So it's been really nice to have the 3 different talks and the 3 different angles around that, you know, and looking at the VR as well as the filmmaking, and also looking at your, you know, these people in the driving seat, but then also looking at it from the multiple perspectives of how someone engages with digital storytelling in lots of different ways. So thank you very much for that. Thank you to all of you, actually, really interesting talks. So you're not off the hook yet. Assuming the dog doesn't kick my laptop off this table, we'll get on with some questions. It's always the fun of doing Zoom from home, isn't it? Okay, so a couple of questions for you. That we'll ask a few questions, and then we'll see if the audience have got any questions coming through on the Q&A. So you've all heard the presentations. Audience, feel free to ask some questions in the Q&A if you want, and we can try and get some of those to the panelists in the next half hour. So I think you probably answered this in your presentations, but just to kind of like emphasize and reiterate it, what do you believe are the main components in creating sort of great digital story experiences? Any of you can start. Go on, Lucy.
A good story at the start.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that people can get quite turned in knots about the idea of digital storytelling, or there's a lot of language around it, as sort of Tim so brilliantly explored, that everything is called immersive now, even if it's like an immersive coffee drinking experience. I don't know, it's like everything. So I think really I would say that the key thing for me has been, I want to tell this story, and I feel like and when that idea is sort of in its first iteration, the technology is already there, integrated into how I want to deliver that story. And that's to say that when I started out, I didn't fully understand. I wasn't completely into the world of virtual reality. I wasn't like completely sort of immersed in that world, understanding all of the kind of politics of what's the best bit and all that stuff. It was more, I understood that the mechanism of delivery for the storytelling would mean a built 360-degree environment. And I was like, what excites me about that in terms of the story that I want to tell? And so I think that's a really important thing to say, and kind of don't get too bogged down in feeling like you don't know enough, but the technology it should be there at the beginning, is all I'd say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that's really interesting, and I think, and you mentioned it as well, Tim, in your talk, you know, creating this entire story world that you can then play with once you're in that space, and having that kind of 360-degree kind of environment that you've manufactured or created for then both the audience and the actors to engage with, is quite an interesting space to be in, I think, actually.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think you're absolutely right, is that the technology, there's a strange chicken and egg to it, isn't there? Because you don't want to find a story to showcase technology. The technology has to kind of solve a problem that the story created, you know, otherwise it's just gimmicky. But in order to know that the problem could be solved, you have to know a certain amount about technology. So it's almost like when I work with people doing consultancy on this, it's always, we kind of do this technology horizon scan of like, this is what all the different stuff can do, and then just put that to the back of your mind and then focus on the story. And when you find a problem with the story, there may or may not be something from that technology toolkit that can solve it. But otherwise it's just gimmicks. And I think sometimes it's quite often the funding and or the chance to kind of demo stuff, it comes from the technology companies themselves, which is a real challenge for the storytelling, because obviously they want you to showcase their kind of kit, so that as a sort of proof of concept. But I still think that the process works, doesn't it? You work out what the technology can do, and then you find a story that needs it, rather than
But then you might find this, Kev. Did you find that allowing these young people access to that technology as a conduit for them to tell their stories, but in a way that they've never told them before? Because, so in a sense, they're learning about the technology at the same time as they're finding that funnel to tell their story. Do you find that quite empowering for them?
Yeah, well, I think like social media companies cottoned on to this idea of sharing stories, you know, is a big thing. They're very pushing it. And so in a way, we're all telling our own story. I think once you've got control over that and you've got access to kit to tell that professionally. I mean, one of the things, like I'm not on the immersive level that these guys are with, and you know, I've got loads of ideas in my head about, how could we, you know, evolve into those kind of spaces and do this social work that's, you know, taking on some of those approaches. But yeah, I feel like it's about like giving them access to professional quality products. Like they shape it, but they're working with professionals. So it's like, yeah, part of it's hands-on, but I'm not teaching them to be filmmakers. I'm teaching them to explore storytelling and about what messages and what like messages and key points they want to get across, because it's usually about a social issue. So it's more about that, really.
And that's interesting, because you all sort of approach digital storytelling in a slightly different way. Is there kind of a main kind of key checklist you've got when you start, as like, how are you going to make this story in practice? Are you creating the story world first, or are you just talking about the story? It's, you know, is it about authenticity, or is it about honesty of a story, and then are you creating something from that? Or what kind of order of things do you approach it in?
Well, it can be quite tricky, because like you want people to lead, but then, for example, if you're doing a volunteer recruitment campaign for a national charity, they've got like a 67,000 page branding guidelines document, and it's a bit like, well, you wanted me to do a participant-led sort of digital experience that they're accredited for, or do you want to just do what the marketing department does? So like, how do we merge the two worlds? So sometimes it can be quite tricky. But I think it's about the authenticity. I think it's about ownership and about collaboration. So like, we're working in a team. The people are playing different roles, but we're all working to the same thing, and we're trying to utilize all of the skills and quality artists that we can to produce something that looks visually stunning. You know, it's like sort of doing community work, but not in a community center. You know, doing it in, you know, high-tech classrooms with whiteboards and, you know, access to the internet and, you know, digital cameras and, you know, lighting and photography and video. So yeah, I don't know if that answered the question.
That's really good, actually. Yeah, it was interesting, actually, just what you're talking about around authenticity. And I was at the Northern Girls at Brid, actually, Lucy, and I really enjoyed it. And with that, it was the authentic storytelling from these young lassies. But it was also the song, you know, they were singing, and it was outdoors as well, and it was cold. So you were outdoors during the pandemic, and you know, they were telling their stories in the place, in the environment, and this level of authenticity was really important and interesting. But then with the gunpowder plot, I mean, you might be authentically recreating an experience, but obviously it was from the 1600s. So with that, and I was really interested in what you said, Tim, around multiple senses. You know, that sense of smell, the smell of carbolic soap just takes me back to primary school in an instant. It's such a powerful sense. So in terms of that authenticity of storytelling, Tim, how do you deploy that that in your story world to recreate history and to bring that to life?
Yeah, well, that was a really that was one of the big challenges for us, because if you were forensically accurate about stuff, so that the script was in like early modern English, and all the music was played on lutes and horrible bagpipes.
I can't believe you just said that about bagpipes. I know, I can't stand bagpipes either.
Just horrible bagpipes. The medieval, like Jack Tudor, they just had these horrible things. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. Trouble here. But it was what we did actually was, because we knew we're gonna bash into these things, was that we had a kind of agreed, we called it the authenticity statement, about all the different creative parameters, like and how accurate they needed to be historically, and what degree of creative license we could take with them. So things like the script, it can be in contemporary English, but let's pull in some really like fun phrases from, some evocative language from the 17th century. The soundtrack, again, we wanted it to have a little bit of a feel of period, but actually we were going much more for a kind of spy, like film noir type feeling. I mean, I'll talk about this later, is that we cast the audience as spies with it. That's the audience role that we make.
Okay.
So yeah, you can really actually break immersion if you make things too accurate.
Mm-hmm.
There needs to be a kind of you need to make it, the experience, accurate for modern minds,
mm-hmm.
while still being kind of inspired by that, like the kind of historical facts.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's fair enough. Okay. I've got a question from Mariam Carolia for Kev. Is they're starting a project working with children in the care system, and they wondered, what difficulties did you face persuading people to get involved? You're on mute, Kev.
Okay, what I would say is that obviously care children have a corporate parent, which is the local authority, and you can imagine why local authorities are really risk averse in terms of also, like, safeguarding and data protection and protecting them young people. So there is some challenges, but I suppose it depends how you tell a story. One project I did with City York Council, the Show Me That I Matter group, was like a story. It was actually written by Powell Hewitt, but it was based on conversations with the children. So they talked about these experiences, the things that mattered to them in the care journey that they've been on, and he created this character that went through this journey. And so it's not them, it's not an actual person, it's not Jane or Peter, from the project. It's all their like sort of experiences into a character that's told through this really powerful writing. And we had some challenges with that about references and things like that. So I think it is difficult about being really accurate and also preserving how you present yourself as a local authority. I think it's a really tricky one, but I do think we should listen to children, young people in the care system, and not mute their voices, not curtail their voices, actually give them freedom to go, this is what I want to express about it. Because I believe you only get real fundamental change in systems when you actually get real about what the experience of the person experience that system is. So I would say go for it, because their voices matter. But yeah, it can be tricky on a sort of legal side with like working out what way to do that. But again, it's the way that you tell it, and it's how you protect them young people and their stories as well.
Mm-hmm. Tim, did you have your hand up there, or were you just scratching your chin?
Scratch my chin. No, are all your films on your website? Because it's such amazing stuff. It would be awesome.
Yeah, my website's really rubbish. After seeing you guys and all your immersive stuff and that, I'm quite jealous. Yeah, but no, I have a YouTube channel where there's lots of content on there. There is some bits of stuff on the website as well. But yeah, no, it's all real stuff. Like I love it because I get to meet lots of different people and hear lots of different stories. Technology is moving so fast. Like I have loads of ideas about where you could go with projects like that in the future. But I'm not very technically minded in terms of the technology that you guys are talking about. I'm just there like a fascinated student going, what did they say? What did they do there? 360 room. It just sounds amazing. I think
that's where you collaborate with other folk, though, isn't it?
Well, yeah, exactly. That's it. I think the most advanced thing that I ever did was we did a screening in the Cube in the university there, in University of York. That was pretty cool. It was like different sides of the wall and doing different things. But yeah, I like all that stuff. But yeah, all on websites.
Cool, brilliant. And we can put that up at the end as well, make sure. In fact, it's actually on the website. If you go to Kev's speaker profile, his website URL's there. Bless you, my dog just sneezed. So a question from Imran. Are concerns about mass adoption of immersive stories unwarranted? And what are the ethical issues at hand? That's probably for you, Tim, and Lucy.
I'm not sure I 100% understand. Is this kind of like metaverse?
I think, yeah, so lots of people adopting immersive stories and people being, it might be about metaverse, yeah, and concerns. Imran, is it about metaverse? Maybe he'll type, yeah, maybe he'll type as an answer.
Yeah, because concerns about the metaverse are warranted, I think, by and large. I mean, not necessarily as a principle, but there's the safeguarding issues within it are absolutely horrific. And
yeah, he's saying yes, it is a metaverse.
Yeah, I think it's a very weird thing. I mean, it's so kind of crappy at the moment. I guess, like, to do another definition thing, the metaverse as in a way to link together all the virtual worlds that already exist, that kind of, so you can live a kind of whole existence. I mean, well, we don't want to do that. None of us want to do that, I don't think. You know, it's only Mark Zuckerberg wants us to do that. But but I think, you know, if you go into any, I felt the need to kind of put myself in all these situations to know about. You go into Horizon Events Room and there was a comedy club. So I went into a comedy club and immediately someone asked me to go on stage and tell a joke. It's just like absolute nightmare. Anyway,
that would fill me with fear, actually. Yeah. I'm not very good at jokes.
Can I just add, it's not really about the metaverse necessarily, but there's a brilliant company called Fast Familiar who have written quite a lot about their experiences with highly interactive experiences and storytelling, where they ask the audience to discuss the subjects that they are bringing forward in their storytelling. Sometimes it's based on documentary subjects. It's always really incredibly researched, and it's really worth looking at their work around the ethics of casting the audience in the role of somebody else, or asking them to contribute to difficult conversations. Are they their own views in that world? As like Tim was exploring with his presentation, are the things that if you're asked to be a sort of villain in that environment, how does that space sort of bleed into who that person really is or isn't? And I think that is a really serious aspect of understanding when you're starting these projects. If you want to cast the audience in a certain role and place them in a forum with others, what are the ethics of that, and how safe or unsafe can people be, and how do you control that situation? Is someone playing a role, or are they being themselves, if they're dealing with really difficult and challenging story subjects in particular? So I think it's important to flag that, and it's worth looking at their work, and they do annual reports quite often about their experiences of that kind of work. So yeah.
It's interesting you said that, actually, because Imran's also asked the question of our audiences ready to create their narrative rather than being told their narrative. And you also alluded to this as well, Tim, in terms of that. And obviously, Kev, you're allowing people to create their narrative and not be told it. So, you know, in this kind of new metaverse and immersive world, where you're not just a kind of passive participant, passive kind of consumer of the story, you know, is that something that you kind of have to warn people about in advance and not just throw them on stage and ask them to tell a joke? Or, you know, is that an issue, or is it something that you need to kind of onboard people in a certain way?
I mean, I'll take that first. Absolutely, it's completely essential that you have to set it up and that onboarding experiences where you kind of set the rules of the world and the expectations. And you all also need to be able to respond in real time. You know, if you've got live performers in there, then they have to have a kind of variety of script options to, you know, they might have a group that are totally into it. They might have a group who don't want to say boo to a goose. And and all the rest of it. So it needs that kind of, and you also, I think this sort of, there's another question from Luke here about, you also need to work with a writer who's willing to kind of rewrite stuff based on audience testing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it can't be an absolutely fixed script at the start that is like the holy Bible of the piece. They've got to be able to go, actually, no one's doing that. We need to kind of rejig this thing to encourage them. And the you know, the masters of this Punch Drunk, but I asked Felix Barrett, who's the creative director, at a conference this question once about, you know, sometimes characters go up to people and punch drunk shows and people are like, get away from me. And sometimes people absolutely want those kind of one-on-one experiences. And they rehearse 6 different in and out points for each interaction. So they can take people as far, audience members as far as they're comfortable going. Mm-hmm. And they can then end that in character and in the right location and all the rest of it. So yeah, it's really got to be thought through this.
Massively complex, isn't it? Yeah. Robbie's asking for you, Tim, you know, to create this impactful story, what's more important, the story the author wants to tell or the story the audience directs themselves? And I suppose that leads on a little bit to that.
They've just got to work together.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they have to be, which is most important. Yeah, I it's a good question, and maybe I don't actually have an answer to that, but I think maybe the importance is the interplay between them, rather than one or the other, or the ability for audiences to choose where on that spectrum they'd rather be, yet still have a kind of rewarding experience. But that's a very good question. I need to think about that.
Yeah.
And I would also, quickly, Heather, I'd also argue that even in storytelling where the audience is passive, the author still has no real control over what that audience member takes away. There is no autocratic sense of this is the story. That person's own lived experiences come with them to observe that work anyway. So as Tim says, I think they sort of have to work together, but I think when you're talking about adventuring, you have to just be able to be like an audience adventuring in an environment. A bit like I said at the end, as an author, you still are creating parameters that might be story parameters, it might be sort of world parameters, but you are in control of that, but you have to be open to having an audience member kind of just go off piste within that world. And this is where I would emphasize in making this work, testing it with audiences as much as you can is really important, because you might think you have control, but quite often when you're letting an audience have some agency, you really don't, and they will do things you never expected them to do. And so you have to test it. It's part of the process, which you never really have to necessarily do with a play, for instance, in a traditional setting. The audiences arrive on the first night and it happens. But with this, you have to test it.
It's funny you say that, actually. It reminds me, but we've got Bright Black doing some talks later on the festival, but they were talking about creating this immersive space with things that the audience could interact with in a VR headset. And what they realised, exactly what you're saying, Lucy, is that they got the audience in to beta test this, and all the audience, they had a little cracked window in this VR space, and they had all this stuff. And what the audience ended up doing was literally taking all the stuff and chucking it out the window. You know, like, it had nothing to do with the story, but it was just that what the audience enjoy doing was flinging all of the props out the window. So absolutely, you know, you're in a situation where you and I think this maybe answers your question, Luke, around do stories always follow the traditional storytelling journey? As I think maybe in an interactive space, maybe not so much, but then what do you guys think?
I would just say that this is probably from the perspective of VR, because I've most recently been working especially in that medium, but the storytelling in the sense of using digital technology is really, lots of artists are breaking totally new ground, and quite often it's really spanning a space between very sort of narrative-led storytelling and actually very abstract experiences, just as Tim was describing. So it's a total spectrum. I really don't think it has to follow any order at all. I feel like you can be a total pioneer with this work in lots of ways. If you are placing the audience at the center of a story, it's ultimately their journey as well. So I think that it doesn't ever have to follow a traditional storytelling method. Of course, you want to think about these things for the value for the audience, but in VR especially, I've recently noticed that it spans from like contemporary art sort of feeling experiences to really strongly narrative driven documentary and film work. So it's really is a huge spectrum.
Cool. Okay, well, I've got loads of questions coming in, which is fantastic. I've got one from Olivia. What are the specific guidelines between a digital story and a game? And does this affect the overall presentation and how you pitch it? Does it have to look like a game to be a game? And if so, what does a digital story have to look like? Tricky question.
I mean, I would say that, there is a game is something that follows a game mechanic. Essentially, there's a sort of a set of rules within it that you have choices and they have implications, and there's some way of kind of winning or losing and getting better and going up through levels and winning prizes, or however that is, how it's delivered. And I'd say yes, it definitely does impact it, because you have to. I mean, it just an example from years ago. We did some work at Historic Royal Palaces where it was very much game mechanic based, but trying to tell a historic story, and the history couldn't be put into the game mechanic neatly. So they ended up having to kind of invent bits, invent kind of magical elements to it. And it kind of, well, it actually did happen in real life, but you can't put it in a game because of the kind of rules of it. So you do have to be aware that sometimes actually the format itself has very, very strict kind of expectations and implications on the content that you can put into it. So and I don't think you can shift or change between them partway through the process. Okay. I don't know.
I would also say as well that actually I am not really into the games world properly, but I've seen quite a lot of people speak very brilliantly on this subject recently, and a lot of games that are marketed as commercial games or free games even don't actually follow a game mechanic at all and are very exploratory narrative experiences. So I think that there is a kind of common parlance around what people think a game is, but then I would also say that there's an industry language between the two that actually has a lot of crossover as well. So for instance, the archive, we work with a really great academic at the University of York called Ben Curran, and this was something we discussed, that there is no way to win or lose that game, but it is still a game. So that's not to confuse anyone, but there is actually quite a lot of a big spectrum in game, the way people talk about games, as much as there is in terms of digital storytelling. So I feel like there is a Venn diagram with a massive sort of area in the middle between the two.
You've got a squiggly spaghetti bit in it as well. I've got Ben actually doing a session for us, Olivia. If you're interested, have a look. He's actually going to be doing a talk about games and also about play on, so in the future. Okay, I'm just conscious of time. We've got 2 minutes left, so very quickly, Robbie's asked, what impact does the digital device you use to tell a story have in conveying your story's message? Does it have an impact?
I can really quickly just say that for me, a VR headset is very alien to a lot of people. So I think the onboarding, as Tim said, is absolutely essential. And it does have an impact because for some people who've never done it before, they're very conscious and aware of the fact that they are basically blindfolding themselves sometimes in a public space with a new piece of kit they've never had. So having that kind of real care for your audience about understanding what that technology is and their experience of it is essential. And then I'd also say, if you're looking at using a phone or an iPad, think about all of the really boring stuff that happens on an iPad on a phone, and how do you make that exciting for an audience through your story? Why is it on an iPad? Why is it on a phone? And what makes it different from another application that they use to do their shopping list, for instance? Those are the two things I'd say.
Great. Okay, apologies to the...
Sorry, go on, Tim. That's exactly right, those.
Sorry, say that again, Tim. I cut you off.
No, I completely agree. They were the perfect answers. Yeah. Great. Don't be the most boring thing they've ever done on the phone.
That's a brilliant end. Okay, apologies to the participants who've asked questions that I haven't had time to answer. I'm sorry about that. Come to more sessions and keep asking, and we'll eventually get your questions answered. Okay, so we're running out of time, so all I'm going to do now is say a massive big thank you to you guys. That was superly interesting. Feel really inspired. I'm really excited now for the rest of the festival as well. You know, so thank you very much for your time and effort here today. That's been brilliant. Thank you very much to our participants who have joined us online and have been asking questions. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Thank you to our sponsor Sign, who without their funding we couldn't run the festival. And just to tell you, this has been recorded, so tell all your friends, go find it. I'll put it out on our website after this so that you have access to it afterwards. And don't forget, we have a zillion other sessions. We've got one tonight which Tim's going to be part of again, talking about the gunpowder plot in more detail. So if you were interested in that, come along. You know, so that is going to be our next session later, which is personal, historical and educational storytelling. And we've got Dinah Lammerman, who used to present for BBC and who's involved with loads of immersive projects, will be joining us, and Sarah Coward from In the Room, who was part of the project alongside Bright White, who did the In the Room with Nile Rodgers, was involved with the Holocaust Forever project as well. So there's going to be some really exciting and interesting stories and insights later today as well. So feel free to join us on that. Go to the website northerndigifest.co.uk and you can sign up there for free. And without further ado, I'm going to close the session. Thank you, Maggie, for being my right-hand man and being there in case everything broke. Thankfully it didn't this time. Fingers crossed it won't next time either. Massive thank you to you guys, and we'll see you again soon.